Hello there and welcome to Travels with Geordie. If this is your first visit, my name is Peter Knowles and I live on a classic wooden motor cruiser in Victoria, British Columbia, along with the loving memory of my pup Geordie. But no, not this one here. If you've been following along, you know that we've been cruising up in Desolation Sound in the Inside Passage of Vancouver Island and having an absolutely amazing time. And we're going to start this episode off with a bit of a project. There's always something to do on a wooden boat, isn't there? Last week's episode leaves us off in Prideaux Haven, and the next day we crossed right across Desolation Sound, underneath the Redondas, over to Cortes Island, and into Cortes Bay, hunting for cell service, and we did a little project here. Some of you may remember that before we left Victoria, I installed hoses so that the engine, through its excess heat, could heat hot water in the hot water heater, the new hot water heater. And that went really well, except for some reason the water isn't getting really hot. So I suspect maybe the thermostat is stuck open. This is a thermostat. For any of those who've never seen it, it's a device that sits in the top of the engine that decides when the cooling water in the engine recirculates through the heat exchanger and thus cools the engine better. But until it gets up to temperature, it restricts the water from going into the heat exchanger and only circulates in the block of the engine, getting the heat up. Well, I have a feeling the thermostat is either stuck open or possibly not even there. So this thermostat, when I flew home a couple of weeks ago, I grabbed out of my engine, as well as a brand new gasket for it. So we're going to pull the header tank off and check the condition of the thermostat, but there's something we need to do before that. And that extra step is to confirm that this thermostat even works, and it's fairly dirty. It's obviously been in the engine for quite a long time. So what we have here is a pot with a thermometer, and we're going to bring the water up to temperature and toss the thermostat in and see if it opens. Written on the bottom of almost every thermostat is the temperature at which it should open, and on this one it says 78. I don't know if you can read it. That would be Celsius, somewhere below the boiling point. All right then, so as we push through 60 degrees, if you see in the very center of the thermostat there, it's the plunger, the valve, and that will drop down if the thermostat opens. So we're shooting for around 78, and what are we at here right now? Just going through 60. The anticipation? That is about 78 degrees right there. I'm not expecting it to be accurate within a degree. And there we go, folks. That bubble that just emerged is because the valve has opened. It dropped down, and it's not open very far, but it's open a little. We'll see if it carries on. Okay, here we are at about 95 degrees, and I'm going to turn the stove off because I don't believe there's any need to stress test this thing. It is definitely open, whether it's open enough for spec, but if you can see through there, that is definitely open. So this thing works. So let me give it a little cleanup and we'll install it. Fun. Hello, old friend. All right then, so the thermostat is directly below these 4 bolts. It's basically between the header tank and the block. Well, not quite the block, a little extension piece that holds the thermostat housing. So to get to it, this has to come off. That's these 4 bolts, as well as all the hoses that are attached to it. Now, there's only fresh water in this cooling system right now. I've never put antifreeze in it, so you'll see that I'm just going to let the water drain into the bilge and use the bilge pump to pump it overboard. Fortunately, we have plenty of fresh water on board, so I can top it up again. First, I'll release any pressure, which I don't expect there's going to be, but let's see. Nope. Happily, the water is right there. So there's never been a engine water leak on this, so it's holding itself together very well. Let's take some hoses off. Of course, it's always a little unnerving taking an engine apart on the anchor. Like, this has to go back together. Yeah. But hot water would be really nice. Okay, let's go. because it's not long ago that I put this all on here, I'm quite confident that all the hoses and clamps are in nice shape. So they should come off quite easily. Make sure nothing ugly is happening here. That feels good. And that feels good. Now, I think probably you might have detected that I think there may not even be a thermostat in here. Well, we're all going to find out together. Okay, that's where the water comes pouring out. There we go. Well, folks, can you see what I can see? No thermostat. Okay, I'm just going to let that sit there. How about that? Well, what kind of an irresponsible lout am I that I put this together with no thermostat? I'm having to handle this gingerly because the oil cooler is on the end here, and I don't want to stress the oil cooler lines. Very nice. Now, modestly in my defense, or ever so slightly is what I'm trying to say, we did order 2 thermostats for the 2 engines when we first ordered a bunch of parts for them. And unfortunately, the outfit we ordered them from sent a newer version of the thermostat, which is much smaller. In fact, we ordered 2 more to correct the problem, and they sent the same small ones again. So now I'm remembering how this all came about. Now I got to make sure this can sit down in there flush, because if it doesn't, the gasket won't seal properly. Put a paper towel in the bottom here to catch the bulk of this. I don't know if you've noticed, I'm standing on my new platform that I built in here. I'm just loving it. It changes working on the engine so much. There we go. That's sitting down flat now. Love it. New gasket. Now this is a rubber gasket, so it doesn't need any compound of any sort. And the trick is to make sure it stays in place as I put the header tank back on, which is actually not quite as simple as you might think, because it's quite bulky working with the header tank, but let's see how we do. So I put 2 bolts through. And see if I can align them before I put any pressure on this. There we go, all 4 are mated. Now, I'm going to take them back out one at a time and put a little fluid film on them to give them just a little bit of thread lubricant, because they are not cutting, but screwing into aluminum, and I like to have a little something. I don't have any thread compound here. Worse yet, some of you will also have noticed that these bolts are going straight into this aluminum housing with no seal up here. And of course, technically, the header tank is under pressure. Up to about 15-18 psi. It hasn't been in the past because the engine is cooling so well, and in fact, those of you who are familiar with diesel engines, you're going to say, Peter, the poor motor has never come up to temperature. Well, it hasn't. But as a result, things are going to change now. It's going to run hotter, which is good, but it's also going to build up pressure, which will expose leaks it didn't have before. It could be all through the system, but certainly here. So what I'm going to do, because I don't have any seals for here, I don't even have any washers this size with me, I have to do something temporary to get us to the next town where I can buy some washers and fabricate some O-ring gaskets for it. What I'm going to use now is the remains of the old gasket, which will work just fine, at least in the meantime, and I'm going to add to that with a little of my favorite butyl tape. Yeah. Okay, so this is a field repair if there ever was one. Gasket, a little bit of butyl tape. We'll put this little bit of fluid film on here to make the threads a little happier in the bottom, and in she goes. Okay then, well, as I expected, of course, the butyl will all just squeeze out, but for the little bit that's actually doing the work. Actually very pleased with that until I can do better. Let's get the hoses back on. And that's full. Okay, let's start her up and see if it holds it. Okay, so all I can really test now is the raw water connections, and they're not leaking because it's going to take forever for the engine to get hot enough that any hot water actually starts circulating in this header tank. Because now, of course, with the thermostat working, it's not going to open until the water underneath gets to 85 degrees, 87, 78, I forget what was on that thermostat. Anyway, to the predetermined temperature. So that's basically running the engine operationally. So what I'm going to have to do is just take a short jaunt and check how everything's doing in here. And yeah, that's not always so easy. All right then, so the last thing I want to do while I've got this open is prepare for a bit of an upcoming experiment. Some of you may know that the tachometer doesn't work on this boat if you followed the repower and putting the engine in. I've never actually installed a working tachometer. As a result, I can't tell how fast the engine's going. Well, that's not super critical, unless I want to do some math about how much horsepower we're actually using, because I know the horsepower curves for this engine tells me a little bit about whether the prop is well pitched and things like that. I just want to know the speed. So I bought this relatively cheap digital tachometer online, which relies on a little bit of reflective tape which comes with it, which I'm going to apply to the front of the main crank pulley. And then subsequently, when the engine's running, I can reach in underneath by opening all this, zapping this thing at it, and it'll read off the exact RPM. I hope. So let's put some of this tape on. I've cleaned up the pulley, and hopefully this will be pretty straightforward. I've never used one of these optical digital tachometers, and I've never been very good at backing off. You're not really still watching, are you? No, you couldn't be. Go! The banjo nail wins! Okay. All right, this could be really fun. The trick now is to find a 9-volt battery for this. And of course, any self-respecting homeowner knows where you can always steal a 9-volt battery from. Yeah, the smoke detector. Okay then, with battery installed, this suddenly weighs about 4 times as much. And of course, yes, I will definitely return this battery to the smoke detector the moment this little experiment is over. So it doesn't seem to have an on or an off. It seems you just press the button and it'll read the speed. It has a memory button, which I guess if you press that, it stores whatever. Anyway, never mind. Let's play with it. I could read instructions, but I'm much more excited to just keep trying it. So let's start the engine again. Oh, heck, that's a lot of fun. Memory doesn't seem to work after that. Maybe I should read the instructions. Well, I was able to decipher the exhaustive and accurate instructions, and I've learned how to use it, and it is indeed idling at about 600 RPM. And from what my ears tell me, our fast cruise is probably about 1200 RPM. But of course, I'll confirm that underway, sticking the tachometer through a hole and figuring out a way. Neat! All right then, well, that's a few jobs done. I'm really quite pleased about that. We'll do some more research on engine speed stuff, but for now let's just clean up and enjoy the rest of this day. Having done the work we needed the internet for, we decided it was worth doing a good steam to check the new thermostat down around the bottom of Cortes Island and up into Gorge Harbor, which is an interesting spot with a very narrow gorge leading in. However, to be fair, we circled around and decided not to stay, and instead decided to come back out again and around this short corner into Manson's Landing, which was really quite a pretty spot to spend the night. And good morning, just departing Manson's Landing on the west side of Cortes Island. Had a really pleasant night in here last night. Well, folks, this is Refuge Cove, like a community, almost a village. It's this little group of buildings, houses, and businesses, of course, in Refuge Cove. And it's just, I just love it. It's another one of these places that's just a fantastic collection of buildings, sort of just hanging onto the rocks. I'll take you on a little bit of a tour. The pub, unfortunately, is closed right now because, of course, COVID is limiting their ability to do business. But and they're taking advantage of the downtime to do some expansion. That is going to be a monster terrace when it's done. So I can't wait to come back next year when all this is over. Right? It'll all be over. Right? Okay. I'm up for some ice cream. How about you? I don't mean for a moment to show any disrespect for the structure of the buildings here in Refuge Cove. I just find it incredibly interesting, and in fact quite the opposite. I have a huge respect for projects and buildings like this that can just be made to survive in this era of regulations and oversight. I find it very refreshing when buildings can just be maintained. So cool, just so cool. And good morning, we're just leaving the Narrows here at Roscoe Bay. Had a really nice night in here last night and had to make a little early departure. It's just after 6 o'clock because the tide drops, and this inlet right here drops low enough that you can't make passage at low tide. So early morning start, let's have an adventure. Hello and welcome to the Beer of the Week. You are precariously balanced on a life ring. I really hope this doesn't go badly. Anyway, we have today in beautiful Walsh Cove a Belgian moon, Belgian white, and we'll see if I can pour this reasonably well. Ah, yes. Ah, lovely, lovely. Ah. Ooh, pours with a very nice. Little bit too frothy because I'm pouring it just a tad fast. Yes, indeed. So let's think what we think of the Belgian white. Yeah, a bit much on there. Well, it's a
Beautiful, beautiful evening here in Refuge Cove. Doesn't the boat look lovely? Oh, that is absolutely delightful. Brilliant, in fact. I think the word this week will be foolish. Yes. Use the word foolish in a sentence down below in the comments, and I'll send you off a Travels with Geordie t-shirt. See you next week.